Friedrich Nietzsche on the Genealogy of Morals, Part 1, Section 3. In the second place, however, quite apart from the historical untenability of this hypothesis regarding the origin of the value judgment good, it suffers from an inherent psychological absurdity. The utility of the unegoistic action is supposed to be the source of the approval accorded it, and this source is supposed to have been forgotten. But how is this forgetting possible? How has the utility of such actions come to an end at some time or other? The opposite is the case. This utility has rather been an everyday experience at all times. Therefore, something that has been underlined again and again. Consequently, instead of fading from consciousness, instead of becoming easily forgotten, it must have been impressed on the consciousness more and more clearly. How much more reasonable is that opposing theory? It is not for that reason more true, which Herbert Spencer, for example, espoused, that the concept good is essentially identical with the concept useful, practical, so that in the judgments good and bad, mankind has summed up and sanctioned precisely its unforgotten and unforgettable experiences regarding what is useful, practical, and what is harmful, impractical. According to this theory, that which has always proved itself useful is good. Therefore, it may claim to be valuable in the highest degree, valuable in itself. This road to an explanation is, as aforesaid, also a wrong one, but at least the explanation is in itself reasonable and psychologically tenable. So here, Nietzsche is still dealing with those English psychologists, right, and that kind of empiricist conception of the good, which basically begins with the habitual experience of unegoistic actions as beneficial to the people to whom they are done. And eventually they begin to apply the term good to that kind of action, or rather to the benefit that they experience, and eventually custom induces them to describe the actions themselves as good. And Nietzsche's already taken aim at that notion by again linking the origins of language with power relations, and basically noting that it would be kind of silly to suppose that it's the people to whom the unegotistical action is done that has the power to name it as good. It's got to be the powerful, those who have the power to forge language, that are initially responsible for creating that designation, and they're basically talking about themselves. It's the very opposite of unegoistic. It's perfect egoism. That's where the term good really comes from. But here he takes aim at another leg of that kind of empiricist utilitarian theory, and without quite naming it, what I think he's really getting into here is the concept of social utility. So there was the problem of describing a good act as a useful act or a practical act, is that we have to be able to sort of designate, useful to whom, useful for what purpose specifically, useful to whose interests. There's this idea that in the process of forging the identification with the unegoistic action and the good action, there's this forgetting that takes place. And this is going to be an important theme for Nietzsche later on, but he finds it to be sort of contradictory here, that if custom is basically responsible, the continual habitual experience of the benefit, receiving the benefit of unegoistic actions, then there need not be any real forgetting at all. And when he points to Herbert Spencer as giving a kind of more interesting variant on that empiricist viewpoint, I think what he's really talking about here is the idea of social utility, and sort of relating it with the idea of cultural memory. He talks about Herbert Spencer's notion that the concept good is essentially identical with the concept useful, practical, so that in the judgments good and bad, mankind has summed up and sanctioned precisely its unforgotten and unforgettable experiences regarding what is useful, practical, and what is harmful, impractical. So these designations are the result of centuries upon centuries of societies accumulating experience and gradually sort of averaging it out, you could say, so that particular kinds of actions are conventionally designated as good or bad. He finds that a more plausible designation, or a more plausible theory, I guess, than the kind of vulgar empiricism. And it depends very much on the idea of cultural memory, the idea that there is a memory that goes beyond that of the individual and its neural apparatus, that societies remember things, and that language is one of the organs by means of which it preserves cultural memory of past values. And that's going to be, I think, a very important theme from him. But once again, his basic problem with it is going to be the idea that that it's organized around some sort of truth, that somehow this total, habitual, conventional, customary, repetitious experience of the linking of unegoistic actions with some conception of the good legitimates them, makes them true. And what Nietzsche is going to constantly bring us back to is the need to recognize that there is power relation at the bottom of this. There is some kind of a struggle between egos that really doesn't touch on anything that could be called truth, certainly not moral truth. At any rate, this is a very short passage, something of a digression, I think, but it does introduce at least a couple of themes that we'll want to keep track of.